I was sitting on the plastic chair in that cramped room that smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, staring at photographer Rafael Contreras, a 38-year-old man with a scruffy beard and deep dark circles under his eyes, as he held a manila envelope with his hands shaking so much that the paper rattled, making a dry sound that echoed in the suffocating silence of that Thursday afternoon, 3:15 in the afternoon, temperature of 22 degrees in Córdoba, Argentina, where I had lived for 67 years since I was born in that city that now seemed to swallow me alive. He had asked me to sit down before showing anything, and that had already made my stomach turn. My heart raced to 120 beats per minute. My hands become cold and sweaty at the same time, because no one asks you to sit down before showing wedding photos unless something is profoundly wrong. And when he opened his computer and started showing the primaries of my son Daniel's wedding to his wife Luciana, held 6 months ago in the party room of the Central Club, I still didn't understand why my body was already reacting as if I knew a train was about to run me over in slow motion. The first photos were beautiful, normal, happy, Daniel at 32 years old, smiling in a black tuxedo that I paid $2,300 to fit perfectly. Luciana in a white dress that cost $4,500 and that I also helped pay for because her family couldn't afford it. Tables decorated with flowers that I ordered, spending $1,200, guests dancing, hugging, a perfect day that had been the happiest moment of my life. Because my only son was building his family, and I thought I had finally done something right after spending 43 years working myself to the bone as a seamstress in a neighborhood workshop to raise this boy alone, since my husband Thomas died of a massive heart attack at the age of 45 when Daniel was just 7. Rafael continued scrolling through the photos, his mouth set in a thin line, his fingers hesitant on the mouse, until suddenly he stopped at a specific image and said in a hoarse voice that seemed to be scratching his throat, "Miss Carmen, this photo here was taken during dinner, around 9:30 at night. You are sitting at the main table smiling at the camera, and everyone around you is also smiling. But I need you to look at what appears reflected in the large mirror on the wall behind you." I looked at the screen without understanding yet. I saw my face in the photo, my navy blue dress that I bought especially for that night, spending $350 that I didn't have but used on my credit card because I wanted to look beautiful at my son's wedding. My hair that I got done at the salon, spending $80. My smile that seemed genuinely happy in that moment, frozen in time. And then my eyes moved to the back of the image, to the antique mirror with a golden frame that decorated the wall of the salon, and what I saw in that reflection made all the air go out from my lungs all at once, as if someone had punched me in the stomach with full force. In the reflection of the mirror, behind me, perfectly framed and clear, was my sister-in-law Patricia, Tomas's sister, a 63-year-old woman who I always treated like family, sitting next to my 35-year-old nephew Marcos, her son, who I raised almost like a second child, because Patricia had to work nights in 3 jobs when he was little, and Marcos spent half of his childhood sleeping at my house, eating my food, wearing clothes that I sewed for him. In the photo, in the reflection of that damned mirror, Patricia was making an obscene gesture with her right hand, middle finger raised, pointing directly at me, her mouth contorted in a cruel smile that I had never seen on that face I thought I knew. And the worst thing, what made my vision start to darken at the edges, and my entire body shake so violently that the chair shook, was the white napkin that she was holding in her left hand, where it was written in black marker in large, thick letters, "Useless old Carmen, my name." My name written like that, with that hatred distilled in ink, held like a trophy as she pointed that finger at me, while my nephew next to her laughed with his head thrown back, his mouth open in silent laughter captured in that reflection that proved that while I smiled innocently at the photographer's camera, thinking I was surrounded by love at my son's wedding, right behind me, just a few meters away, my own family was humiliating me, mocking me, turning me into a joke. Before continuing, if you have ever experienced family betrayal or have discovered something devastating on people you loved, leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because this story goes far and revenge will be proportional to the pain I will describe here. Comment which city you're watching from, because I need to know that I'm not alone in this, that other people understand what it's like to find out that you were deceived, used and discarded by those who were supposed to protect you. Raphael was looking at me with genuine pity in his brown eyes, waiting for my reaction. And all that came out of my mouth was a strangled sound that wasn't quite crying or quite screaming. It was something in between. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time inside the chest. My hands flew to cover my mouth, my eyes burning with tears that began to run hot and thick down my cheeks, smearing the makeup, falling into my lap, wetting the fabric of the gray blouse I was wearing. He waited in respectful silence while I processed, while my brain tried to make sense of this impossible image, tried to find another explanation other than the obvious, other than the brutal one. Because how was it possible that Patricia, who I had helped financially for 20 years by loaning her a total of $53,000, who she never paid back a cent of, who I took in when she was evicted from her apartment, who I fed, clothed, loved like a sister, how was it possible that she hated me so much that she would do that at my husband's wedding, own son, on the day that should be sacred, special, perfect? And Marcos, my Marcos who I raised, who I held when he was a baby, who I took to the hospital when he broke his arm at the age of 8 because Patricia was working and couldn't go out, who I paid for school supplies for 12 years, spending a total of about $9,000, who I gave money for his first motorcycle, $3,500 that came from my hard-earned savings, who I always treated with affection and pride as if he were my second son. He was laughing at my humiliation, laughing while his mother told me he called me a useless old woman and showed me the middle finger. How long did we stay like that, doing that, while I smiled happily, completely oblivious? How long their laughter lasted at my expense on that night that I thought was beautiful? Raphael broke the heavy silence finally, his voice low and careful as if he were dealing with a bomb about to explode. Donna Carmen, I need to tell you that this is not all. When I saw this photo while I was editing the album 3 weeks ago, I was disturbed and started reviewing all the other images from the night more closely, looking specifically for strange situations involving you. And I found more things, many things, footage too. He slid the manila envelope across the narrow table until it was in front of me, and as I looked at the rectangle of paper that seemed to pulse with evil energy, I felt nausea rising in my throat, a bitter taste of bile in my mouth, my stomach turning violently. There are 15 photos and 3 flash drives with videos in there. I printed and separated everything. I'm not going to charge you for any of that. I just think you need to know the truth about what happened that night. I'm sorry, Miss Carmen. I'm really sorry. His hands were shaking as much as mine when he placed the envelope on the table. I looked at that object as if it were a poisonous snake, knowing that picking it up meant opening a door that could never be closed again. It meant seeing things that couldn't be unseen, knowing things that couldn't be unknown. But at the same time, I already knew that I had no choice, because that first photo had already split my world in half, and now I needed to see the full size of the abyss that was opening up in front of me. I took the envelope with hands shaking uncontrollably, the paper rough against my skin, the weight of it surprisingly heavy, as if it carried not just photographs, but tons of solidified betrayal. I opened the envelope right there in that room that now seemed to be slowly rotating around me, the floor tilting, the walls getting closer, and I started taking the photos one by one, spreading them out on the scratched formica table under the cold white fluorescent light that made everything look like a morgue. The first photo after the one with the mirror showed another angle of the room, taken earlier in the evening during the cocktail party, around 7:45 in the evening according to the time recorded in the corner of the image. And in it I was talking animatedly with the mother of the bride, Donna Estela, a 71-year-old lady who seemed to genuinely like me. But in the left corner of the frame, partially hidden behind a column decorated with white fabric, were my son Daniel and my daughter-in-law Luciana, whispering to each other while looking directly at me, and the expression on their faces was not one of love or pride. Happiness, it was pure irritation, a grimace of barely concealed annoyance, as if my presence there was inconvenient, despite being the one who paid $22,000 for the costs of that entire wedding, including full buffet, decoration, drinks, sound, photographer. Because Daniel's high school teacher's salary of $2,300 a month and Luciana's saleswoman's salary of $1,600 a month did not allow them to pay for that party of 150 guests that they desperately wanted to have. The second photo showed dinner time. 8:23 in the evening. I was sitting alone in my chair at the main table while all the other occupants of that table, including Daniel, Luciana, her parents, the godparents, were standing on the other side of the room talking in a closed circle, and no one, absolutely no one, had come to call me or include me in that conversation that seemed lively and important. And in the photo, I was looking at the plate of food in front of me with a lost and lonely expression that broke my heart because I remembered that moment. I remembered feeling confused about why everyone had gotten up without telling me. I remembered thinking it was just their distraction, the natural excitement of bride and groom at their own wedding. But now seeing that frozen photo, it was obvious that it had been deliberate exclusion. I had been left there on purpose, intentionally isolated, while the whole family gathered away from me. The third photo was even worse. It showed the moment of the main toast, 9:57 at night, when Daniel gave his speech thanking everyone. And in the image, he was standing with a glass of champagne in his right hand, microphone in his left, a wide smile illuminated by the spotlight in the hall, and I was right behind him applauding with tears of joy flowing because I remembered that he had said beautiful things about love, family, gratitude. But looking at the photo now with painful attention, I realized that at no point during that speech was he looking in my direction. His eyes swept the entire room, touching every person except me, and when I mentally zoomed in on the image focusing on the people around me, I saw that several guests, at least 7 or 8 that I could identify in the photo, including my cousins, uncles, people I had known all my life, were looking at me not with affection or emotion, but with something that looked like pity mixed with discomfort, as if they knew something I didn't, as if they were watching tragedy in progress and feeling bad for me, but not enough to do anything about it. The fourth photo captured a moment during the dance, 11:15 at night, one of the last songs before the party started to empty, and showed Patricia dancing with a group of women that included 2 of my cousins, Adriana, 58 years old, and Beatrice, 62 years old, both of whom I always considered close, and the 4 of them were laughing hysterically at something, their mouths open, their bodies bowed with laughter. But what caught my attention and made my stomach turn was that Patricia was holding her cell phone with the screen facing away. To the other women, clearly showing something on the screen that was causing that reaction of exaggerated laughter, and from the position of the group and the way they occasionally looked in my direction that was visible in the reflection of another smaller mirror in the background of the photo, it was clear that whatever they were seeing on the cell phone was related to me. It was about me. It was ridiculing me in some way, and my own cousins, my blood, were participating in that mockery with huge smiles on their faces. The next photos were variations on the same cruel theme, different angles and moments from the same night that now revealed itself not as a celebration of love, but as an elaborate theater of humiliation, where I was the only person in the entire room who didn't know I was the protagonist of a collective joke. Photo 5 showed my nephew Marcos taking a selfie with a group of his friends, all young people in their 30s, and behind them, partially visible in the corner of the frame, I was trying to arrange the presents on the cake table. And one of Marcos's friends was pointing at me from behind, making a gesture of shooting himself in the head with his gun-shaped hand while the others laughed. Photo 6 captured the moment I went to the bathroom. Not me per se, but my return from the bathroom, 10:38 at night, where I could be seen in the hallway heading back towards the lounge, and in the opposite corner of the hallway, partially hidden behind a decorative plant, was Luciana, my daughter-in-law, chatting intensely with 2 of her bridesmaids, and the expression on her face was one of utter exasperation as she rolled her eyes dramatically, and although it was not possible to hear what she was saying, her body language screamed, "Thank God she left for a bit. I can't stand that old woman clinging on any longer." Photo 7 was from the moment of the cake cutting, 12 minutes past midnight, when traditionally the groom's mother should be next to her son helping, or at least close by for the special photos. But in the image, I was at least 5 meters away, pushed back by other guests who were crowded closer. And Daniel hadn't made any move to call me closer. He hadn't looked for me with his eyes. He simply cut the cake with Luciana, surrounded by her parents and their friends, while I stood on the sidelines as an insignificant extra on the most important day of my only son's life. The remaining photos were more of the same devastating pattern, but Raphael had saved the worst ones for the bottom of the envelope. The last 3 photos he had placed inside white tissue paper, as if they were so toxic they needed an extra layer of protection. When I bent over the delicate paper and saw photo number 13, my lungs stopped functioning completely for several long seconds. The photo had been taken outside the room in the club's smoking area at 2:43 in the morning according to the digital record, so at the end of the party when many guests had left, and it showed a large group of people, perhaps 20 or 25 people, including Daniel, Luciana, Patricia, Marcos, several cousins, uncles, friends, all gathered in a semicircle, and in the center of that semicircle was a large cell phone, probably a tablet, resting on a small white plastic table. And everyone was looking to the screen of that device and laughing, some with hands covering their mouths from laughing so hard, others with tears in their eyes from laughter, others clapping. And the photographer, Raphael, had managed to capture the perfect angle where it was possible to see the reflection of what was being displayed on the tablet screen. And it was video, a compilation of videos actually, of me, of the party, moments where I had apparently done something considered funny or pathetic, like when I tripped slightly going up the steps of the stage to hand over an envelope with money to the bride and groom, like when I spilled some champagne on my blouse during the toast and I tried to discreetly wipe it off but I couldn't, like when I danced alone for a few seconds to a song I liked, but no one else was dancing, so I stopped embarrassed. All those moments that at the time made me feel only small, temporary embarrassments, but that someone, probably Marcos or Daniel or both, had purposely filmed throughout the night to later compile and show as entertainment for the select group of the most intimate guests who stayed until the end, transforming my presence at that wedding into a comedy show at night, at my expense. Photo number 14 showed a moment a few minutes later, 7:03 in the morning. The same group was still outside, but now some were smoking, others drinking from bottles of beer they had brought, and Patricia had her arm around Daniel's shoulders, my son, my baby that I raised alone with all my strength, and she was whispering something in his ear that made him laugh and nod in agreement. And the intimacy between the two in the photo was that of conspirators, of people who share secrets. And the jealousy I felt seeing that was less than the pure pain of understanding that my son had a closer and more complicit relationship with my sister-in-law, who was always toxic, than with me who sacrificed everything for him. The last photo, number 15, the one that finally made me vomit in that photographer's room, getting up from the chair, staggering to the gray plastic trash can in the corner, and expelling everything I had in my stomach in violent spasms that hurt my ribs, showed the final exit, 4:31 in the morning when the last guests were leaving, and I was visibly exhausted in the photo, makeup smeared, hair messy, shoulders slumped, holding my small black bag and standing there near the door, waiting for Daniel and Luciana to finish, to say goodbye to other guests, so that we could leave together since we had agreed that I would go with them in their car. But in the photo they were deliberately ignoring me, chatting animatedly with other people, and when they finally looked in my direction, the expression on both their faces was one of barely concealed irritation, that look of, wow, she's still here waiting, what a shame. And somehow that photo of such a small and seemingly insignificant moment hurt more than all the others, because it revealed that even at the end of that night where I had spent $22,000, I didn't have to make their dream wedding happen. I was still seen as an inconvenience, as a burden, as something to be tolerated, not celebrated. After vomiting everything I could, I was crouched next to that dumpster, breathing heavily, the short and quick ones, my entire body shaking so violently that my teeth were chattering, the horrible taste of bile in my mouth, cold sweat running down my forehead, my neck, my back, soaking my blouse, and Raphael appeared at my side with a glass of water that I accepted with hands shaking so much that I spilled half of it on the floor before I could bring it to my mouth. He helped me back to the chair, waited for me to compose myself at least a little, and then, in an even lower and more careful voice than before, he said, "The flash drives have videos. There's one especially that I think you need to see, but I'll warn you that it's heavy. Very heavy. It's a recording of a conversation." I looked at the 3 small flash drives, one red, one blue, one black, that had fallen out of the envelope when I spread out the photos, and with a shaking hand, I picked up the black one, because something in my instinct told me that that one was the worst. Raphael took the pen drive, connected it to his notebook, and opened the video file that started playing. The image showed a fixed angle of what appeared to be a security camera in the party room itself, positioned in the upper corner of the room, capturing a wide view of one of the smaller rooms adjacent to the main room, those rooms that are reserved for bride and groom to rest or store gifts. The time marked in the video was 1:57 in the morning, so it was already well into the party, and initially the room was empty. But then the door opened and Patricia, Daniel, Luciana, Marcos, and two other people who I identified as Luciana's parents, Mr. Roberto, 69 years old, and Ms. Estela, 71, entered. 6 people in total. The video's audio was surprisingly clear, probably because the ballroom sound system had microphones scattered throughout every room, and you could hear every word spoken with painful clarity. Patricia closed the door behind everyone, and the first thing that came out of her mouth, with a tone of voice that I had never heard before, a voice full of venom and sarcasm, was, "Thank God we managed to get a few minutes away from the heavy old woman. I can't stand that poor thing she looks like all the time." Daniel laughed. My son laughed at that line about me and replied, "I know, Mom, I know. But at least after today we can start putting some distance between us. We've already talked about this." The word mother, said to Patricia instead of me, was like being shot in the chest. Luciana threw herself into one of the armchairs in the living room and said in a slurred voice like someone who had drunk too much, "I can't stand how she plays the martyr all the time. Did she pay for the wedding? So what? She had an obligation. We are her family. It's the least she could do after being a burden her whole life." Mr. Roberto agreed, making a sound of approval, and added, "Carmen has always been a bit like that, dramatic, needy. Since I met her through you, I realized that she was one of those people who does everything and then demands it emotionally." Their words echoed in that room and on the video and inside my head as I watched petrified, and each sentence was a new blade cutting in a different place. Marcos, my nephew who I raised, said next, "Do you think she noticed the group?" Patricia responded, laughing, "That stupid woman. Impossible. She barely knows how to use her cell phone properly. And even if she finds out, what will she do? Complain? To whom? Nobody here can stand her. Nobody." Daniel then intervened with a more serious tone. "Look, I know it sounds cruel, but after we move to Mendoza in 3 months, it will be much easier to keep our distance. Call once a month, visit once a year at most. It's our life, not hers." I paused the video at that point because I needed to process what I had just heard. They were planning to move to Mendoza, a city more than 1,000 kilometers from Cordoba, and they hadn't told me anything. Nothing. Daniel had simply announced it in that conversation as an established fact, a decision already made, and everyone else in the room knew it before I did. His own mother, the person who raised him alone, who worked 3 jobs simultaneously when he was a child to put food on the table, who sewed until her hands bled to pay for a good private school for him, who saved penny by penny for 30 years to ensure that he had a better future than mine. I played the video again with my hand shaking on the mouse. Donna Estela, who had always been polite to me the few times we spoke, then said, "It's better this way. You are young, you need to build your own life without the weight of a clingy mother-in-law." My mother was like that, and I had to cut off contact almost completely to have peace in my marriage. Luciana agreed enthusiastically. "Exactly. And honestly, Daniel, I know she's your mother and all, but she's kind of pathetic sometimes. That way of looking for attention, of wanting to be involved in everything, it's suffocating." Patricia took the opportunity to add more venom. "And she has money goo burning, make no mistake. That story about having nothing is a lie. She has worked her whole life. She owns the house where she lives, which is easily worth $130,000. She has a car. She has a pension of $1,800 a month. She just makes a point of playing the poor thing to gain pity and manipulate you. I've known my sister-in-law for 42 years. I know very well how she works." Marcos added, "That's true. I remember when I was a child, and she was always talking about how much she sacrificed for me, how much she spent on me. No child needs to hear this. She basically created me to make me feel guilty and forever indebted to her." The tears streamed down my face without stopping as I watched that video. Each word said there destroying another piece of the image I had of my life, of my family, of who I thought these people were. Daniel then said something that completely broke me. "I'm going to be honest with you. I never felt that mother-son connection that everyone talks about. She was always more of an obligation than a real mother. Functional, but not effective, you know? I know she worked and paid for things, but there was always something missing. It was always mechanical. That's why it's so easy for me to think about distancing myself. There's no real emotional connection there. The pain I felt hearing my son say that has no name in any language in the world. It was as if 43 years of my entire life had been declared null, worthless, meaningless. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every extra work, every meal I skipped to have more for him, every gift I bought instead of buying something for myself, every tear I hid so as not to worry him, absolutely everything had been reduced to functional obligation but not effective in his head. Patricia laughed and said, "Wow, Daniel, how heavy. But I understand. Carmen has always been a bit cold, a bit robotic. I think it's her way. Maybe she doesn't know how to do anything different." Luciana got up from the chair and approached Daniel, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Honey, don't feel bad about it. You don't choose your feelings. And honestly, after everything she's already charged and will still charge, you don't owe her anything. We go to Mendoza, start a new life, and she stays here with her memories. It's as simple as that." The video continued for a few more minutes, but I couldn't watch it any longer. I asked Raphael to pause it because I was having trouble breathing. My chest was tight, as if there was a 50-kilo weight crushing my sternum. My throat was closed. My hands were tingling. Clear signs of a panic attack developing. Raphael turned off the video immediately and gently took my hand. "Donna Carmen, breathe with me, slowly. 1, 2, 3, inhale. 1, 2, 3, exhale." We did that for a few minutes until my breathing began to normalize slightly. And then he said in a voice full of genuine compassion, "The other 2 flash drives have more videos from the party, moments where they are clearly mocking you or purposefully excluding you. I documented everything because I thought maybe you needed proof. Evidence for what, I don't know, but I thought it was important to keep it. You can take it all. It's yours." I looked at that table covered in photographs of my own humiliation, the 3 small flash drives that contained hours of my dignity being systematically shredded, and something inside me that had been broken since I first saw the image in the mirror, something that had been bleeding since I heard my son say he had never felt true emotional connection with me, that something began to transform into something different, harder, colder, sharper. It wasn't anger yet, it was recognition. Recognition that I had been deceived, used, discarded, turned into joke for people I loved more than my own life, people for whom I sacrificed absolutely everything I had, including my health, my youth, my dreams, my happiness. I gathered all the photos with methodical care, put them back in the envelope along with the flash drives. I thanked Raphael in a hoarse voice for having the courage to show me the truth. I paid him the $200 that was the original order price for the photo album that I obviously didn't want anymore, and I left that studio carrying that envelope under my arm, as if carried a bomb that I knew I would eventually have to detonate, but I still didn't know how or when. I took the bus back home. The 40-minute journey seemed to last 4 hours, sitting on that hard green plastic bench, looking out the window, not really seeing anything, just processing, just trying to fit together the pieces of a puzzle that revealed an image too horrible to accept, but too obvious to deny. I arrived at my small 2-bedroom apartment, 58 square meters, on the 3rd floor of an old building without an elevator in the Alberti neighborhood where I had lived for 34 years. I climbed the stairs with legs as heavy as lead, opened the door, entered, closed it behind me, locked it with the 3 locks I always used, and finally, alone in the safety of that space that was mine alone, I completely collapsed. I fell to the floor right there at the entrance, still holding the envelope, and I cried like I had never cried in my entire life, including when Tomas died, because at least when Tomas died, I knew that he loved me. I knew that the relationship had been real, had been honest, had had value, but that brutal discovery that my own son, my own family, people I trusted and loved unconditionally, saw me as a burden, as a joke, as a disposable obligation. That was a different death, the death of something, that I didn't even know I could die, which was the basic belief that I mattered to someone in this world. I cried until I had no more tears, until there were only dry sobs that hurt in my throat, until my head throbbed with the pain of a violent migraine, until my ribs hurt from contracting so much from the spasms of crying. The apartment was getting dark all around as the sun was setting. It was almost 7 in the evening when I finally managed to drag myself from the entrance floor to the old 2-seater sofa in the living room, a sofa that I had bought used 15 years ago and recovered myself by sewing a new cover, and I threw myself there, curled up in the fetal position, hugging a decorative pillow that I had made with scraps of colored fabric, looking at the cracked white ceiling illuminated only by the orange light from the street lamps coming through the window. My entire life flashed through my mind that dark, silent night. I was born in Cordoba in 1958, the daughter of poor Italian immigrants who came to Argentina looking for a better life after the Second World War. My father Giuseppe worked as a bricklayer until he died of lung cancer at the age of 53 when I was just 17. My mother Rosa worked as a washerwoman and treadmill until her fingers were deformed from arthritis and she could no longer hold iron. She died at 66 of a stroke in her sleep when I was 28, and Daniel was just 2 years old. I was the oldest of 4 siblings. I had 2 sisters and a brother, but one sister died of rheumatic fever at the age of 8 before I was born, so I never met her. My other sister Clara moved to Italy when she was 25 and cut off contact with the whole family for reasons I never fully understood, something related to the fight with our parents. And my brother Enzo died at the age of 32 in an accident at work when he fell from the construction scaffolding where he worked, leaving a widow of Patricia, who was his wife, and a young son, Marcos, who was just 3 years old at the time. I grew up without much. We lived in a zinc sheet house with a dirt floor until I was 12 years old when my father finally managed to build a tiny brick house with 3 tiny rooms. I wore neighbors' clothes that no longer fit their daughters. I ate polenta and bread most of the time, and when I was lucky some meat on the weekend, I worked from the age of 13, helping my mother with washing and ironing clothes for richer families in the city center. I couldn't finish secondary school because I needed to work full-time at the 15 years old when my father became ill. I taught myself to sew by watching my mother mend our clothes and eventually started doing small sewing jobs to earn extra money. I met Tomas when I was 18. He was 22 and worked as a truck driver making deliveries between Cordoba and Buenos Aires, a handsome man with green eyes and an easy smile who courted me for 6 months before I finally agreed to date him. We got married civilly when I was 20 and he was 24. We didn't have a party because we had no money. We just signed papers at the registry office and then ate sandwiches that my mother made at her house with the few close relatives present. Tomas was a good man. He never raised a hand against me. He never cheated on me as far as I know. He worked hard and gave his entire salary every month to household management. He only drank occasionally, and even then, little. He went to Mass with me every Sunday. He treated me with respect and affection that many of my friends did not receive from their own husbands. It wasn't a passionate soap opera relationship, but it was solid. It was a true partnership, and I felt safe and loved by his side. We tried to have children for 3 years without success. I had 2 miscarriages, one at 3 months of pregnancy and another at 5 months, both devastating, and the doctors even said that I might not be able to carry the pregnancy to term. But then at 23, I got pregnant again, and this time it worked. This time I lasted the full 9 months despite the risk and complications. And Daniel was born in March 1981, a difficult normal birth that lasted 16 hours and left me with after effects. A healthy baby weighing 3 kilos and 400 grams who cried loudly when she was born and was placed on my chest, still covered in blood and amniotic fluid, while I cried with relief and gratitude and overwhelming love for that little being that I had finally managed to bring into the world. I raised Daniel with all the love and dedication that a mother can give. I breastfed him until he was 1.5 years old. I woke up 3 times a night to change diapers and give him a bottle when I stopped breastfeeding. I sang Italian lullabies that my mother sang to me. I played with him on the living room floor for hours. I took him for walks in the park even when I was exhausted from work. I cooked special foods that he liked. I sewed all his clothes to save money. I made handmade toys with scraps and leftover materials when I couldn't buy toys from the store. I read to him every night before bed. Even when I wasn't literate and had difficulty reading, I taught him how to talk, walk, eat alone, tie shoes, write his name, count numbers, pray before meals, be polite to elders, share with other children, everything a mother does with infinite love and patience that I didn't know I had inside me. When Daniel was 7 years old, Tomas was returning from a long work trip. He had been away for 5 days traveling to Salta and back. He was just 50 kilometers from Cordoba on the road when he had a massive heart attack at the wheel of the truck. He lost control of the vehicle, which left the road and rolled over. He died instantly before the paramedics even arrived. He was only 45 years old. His heart, that always seemed strong, simply stopped beating, probably due to a combination of stress, poor diet on the road, long hours of driving without rest appropriate, and perhaps a genetic predisposition that we never knew existed because his family did not have the money to have regular preventive exams. I received the news of Tomas's death at 11:20 at night when 2 police officers knocked on the door of our small one-bedroom apartment where we lived at the time. I opened the door while still in my nightgown, thinking it was a neighbor complaining about noise or something, and the police officers with serious expressions asked me to sit down and then told me that my husband had died in an accident on the road hours ago, that his body was in the municipal morgue awaiting identification, that I needed to go there to confirm my identity and carry out the necessary procedures. I remember that I was completely paralyzed for several seconds without being able to process the words, and then I collapsed right there in front of the police officers, crying in a way that scared Daniel, who was sleeping in the little room, and woke up to the noise coming from me, crying also without understanding what was happening. I held my son in my lap and explained between sobs that Daddy had gone to heaven with God and wasn't going back, and he, at 7 years old, still didn't fully understand the permanence of death, and asked when Daddy was going to come back to play with him. And I had to tell him again and again that Dad would never come back until he finally started crying, also slowly understanding that something terrible and irreversible had happened. In the days and weeks that followed Tomas's death, I went into automatic survival mode. I had a simple and cheap funeral because we didn't have life insurance or significant savings. I buried my husband in the municipal cemetery in a mass grave because I couldn't pay for a private tomb. I received a few months of assistance from the transport company where Tomas worked, but soon that money ran out, and I found myself completely alone at 29 years old with a 7-year-old son to raise and no specific professional skills other than knowing how to sew, no complete formal education, no robust family support network, because my mother had died the previous year. My father had been dead for years. My only brother had died in an accident 2 years before. My only living sister was in Italy without contact, and that left only Patricia, my brother's widow, with whom I developed a closer relationship at that time, because we were both young widows raising children alone, and I thought we had a special bond of solidarity and mutual support. Desperately needing income to support Daniel, I started working in an industrial sewing workshop in the San Vicente neighborhood, a small, stuffy place with 10 noisy sewing machines where there were 11 seamstresses producing cheap clothes for department stores. I worked from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, 6 days a week, earning per piece produced. So the faster I sewed, the more I received, but it was never much, perhaps $500 to $600, equivalent per month in values at the time. And I left Daniel in the care of Patricia, who at that time was not yet working full-time and stayed at home with Marcos. I paid her $100 a month to take care of Daniel together with Marcos, which I thought was a fair and beneficial arrangement for everyone. I worked in that workshop for 8 years, developing back problems from bending over a sewing machine for 12 hours a day, developing tendinitis in my wrists and fingers from the constant repetitive movement, losing part of my hearing from the incessant noise of the machines, developing respiratory problems from the fabric dust and lint that filled the air in that poorly ventilated environment. But I couldn't complain because I needed that job, I needed that money, I needed to support my son and pay all the bills that kept coming. Parallel to working in the workshop, I started doing extra sewing work at home during the nights and on Sundays, simple repairs like adjusting trouser hems, changing zippers, repairing rips, but also more complex work like making tailor-made clothes for people who came to me on recommendation. I made party dresses, school uniforms, curtains, sofa covers, anything they asked me for and that I could do with my old Singer sewing machine that had belonged to my mother. I often worked until 2 or 3 in the morning finishing orders. I slept 4 or 5 hours a night for years on end. I ate poorly because I didn't have time to cook properly, and most of the time I ate cold leftovers or bread with coffee while I sewed. I lost weight, becoming very thin, 49 kilos on a body measuring 1 meter and 65. Hair began to fall out prematurely due to stress. Deep wrinkles appeared on my face long before the appropriate time. I looked 50 years old when I was actually 35. All the money I earned in the workshop and from extra work went to support Daniel and me. pay $400 a month in rent for our small apartment, pay for private school for Daniel because the public school in the neighborhood was too bad, and I didn't want my son to have a poor education, pay $120 a month in school fees, which was a huge sacrifice, but I thought it was worth it for his future. Buy school materials, uniforms, books, everything he needed. Buy food, clothes, medicine when he was sick, pay electricity, water, gas, telephone bills, saving a small amount every month, trying to create an emergency fund that never grew much because there was always some unexpected expense that consumed that savings. In addition to all this, I also helped Patricia financially whenever she asked, which was often. I lent her over the years sums that added up to at least $53,000, loans of $1,000 here to pay back rent, $2,000 there to cover debt with a loan shark, $3,000 to buy a new refrigerator when hers broke, $5,000 when Marcos needed expensive dental treatment, $10,000 when she wanted to open a small business selling cosmetics that went bankrupt in 6 months, $7,000 when she was evicted and had to pay a deposit for a new apartment, and so on for 20 years. Always lending, never getting it back because she was family. She was my brother's widow. She was the mother of Marcos, who I loved as a nephew, and I genuinely believed that we were all together in this difficult life and we needed to support each other. In addition to direct financial loans, I also helped in other ways. Marcos spent countless nights sleeping at my house when he was a teenager because Patricia worked night shifts as a cleaning assistant at a hospital. I fed Marcos, washed his clothes, helped him with his homework, took him to the doctor when necessary, bought him new clothes and sneakers when Patricia couldn't. I paid for a technical computer course for him that cost $2,500. I gave him his first motorcycle when he turned 18, spending $3,500 of my money. Savings, because I wanted him to have his own transportation to look for better jobs. I treated Marcos exactly as I would treat my own second son, because I thought that was the obligation of an aunt and godmother that I was his. Daniel grew up being a good student. He got high grades. He was respectful towards teachers. He had friends at school. He participated in extracurricular activities when possible. He was a relatively calm child and then a teenager with no serious behavioral problems, and I was enormously proud of him, thinking that despite all the difficulties and his father's absence he was with in order to create a good and decent man. When Daniel turned 15 and it was time to decide about high school, he expressed his desire to go to a technical school with a focus on education to eventually become a teacher, which made me happy because teaching was a stable profession with a good public pension and benefits. And although the salary wasn't high, at least it was a respectable and safe career. I paid for 3 years of technical high school, which was more expensive than elementary school, about $200 a month in tuition. I bought all the necessary materials, a computer used for him to do work that cost $800 in installments that took me a year to pay off. And when he graduated at 18, I encouraged him to go to pedagogy college at the National University, which was free, but still required expenses with materials, transportation, food, so I gave him a monthly allowance of $300 during the 4 years of college to cover these costs. Money that came directly from my minimal savings that I tried to maintain to eventually buy my own apartment and stop paying rent. During Daniel's college years, more or less when he was 20 years old and I was 48, I finally managed to fulfill my old dream of having my own place. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in the Alberti neighborhood being sold for $105,000, a good price for the time and location, and by combining savings from 15 years of obsessive work plus a bank loan that I managed to approve by showing my work history, I was able to make a down payment of $60,000 and finance the rest in 10 years. We moved there, leaving the rented apartment where we lived, and for the first time in my life, I felt real security of having something that was mine, that no one could take away from me, where I didn't have to worry about a rent increase or eviction, was a feeling of immense achievement after so much sacrifice. I worked hard to pay monthly mortgage payments of $550 during those 10 years, which meant that during the entire decade from my 40s to my 50s, I continued to work 12 to 14 hours a day to cover the apartment payment, plus all other regular expenses, plus Daniel's allowance, plus ongoing loans for Patricia and occasional help for Marcos. But I did all of this without complaining, because I thought I was investing in the future, that I was building a solid foundation for my later years when I hoped to be able to slow down and rest a little. Daniel graduated from college at 22, got a job as an elementary school teacher at a municipal school, initially earning $1,400 a month. A modest salary, but enough for him to start an independent life. And at 24, he moved out of my house and into an apartment shared with two friends, which made me simultaneously proud that he was becoming independent and sad that the house would be empty without him after 24 years of raising him there. I continued working in the sewing workshop until I turned 57, when finally pain in my back and severe arthritis in my hands forced me to apply for partial disability retirement. I got a government pension of $1,800 a month, which, combined with occasional sewing work at home that I was still able to do at a much slower pace, gave me a total income of about $2,400 a month. And although it wasn't much, it was enough to live simply and still be able to help Daniel occasionally, and continue helping Patricia, who at 60 years old was still in constant financial difficulties. During all these years, Patricia and I maintained regular contact. She visited me at least once a week. We had lunch together frequently. We talked on the phone almost daily. I thought we had a true friendship beyond the family bond. I thought that after so many years and so many shared difficulties, we had a special and unbreakable bond. She called me her dear sister-in-law. She said I was a sister she never had. She constantly thanked me for my help with Marcos and with money, and I believed in all of that because I never had any reason to doubt of her sincerity. When Daniel met Luciana 3 years ago, he was 29 years old and she was 26, a teacher also working in a private school. I found her friendly at the first meetings, although a little distant towards me, but I attributed it to the natural shyness of a young person meeting her boyfriend's family. Daniel seemed happy with her, and that was what mattered to me. I encouraged the relationship. I welcomed her to my house for family dinners. I tried to create a bond with her by talking about her interests and showing genuine interest in getting to know her better. When Daniel told me that he was planning to propose to Luciana, I was thrilled. I immediately offered financial help for the wedding because I knew he didn't have significant savings and her family didn't have any resources either. Daniel accepted my offer with apparent gratitude, and together we started planning the wedding that would be held a year and a half later at the Central Club. During these months of preparation, I spent $22,000 in total, an amount that represented practically my entire 10-year savings, money that I saved thinking about perhaps going on a small trip one day, or having an emergency fund for old age, or leaving something as an inheritance for Daniel. But I chose to spend it all on that wedding because I thought it was an investment in my son's happiness. I thought I was giving him the perfect start to his married life. I thought he would be grateful and that it would strengthen our mother-son bond. I paid for the hall, buffet, drinks, decoration, photographer Rafael Contreras, sound and lighting, my own new dress, a generous cash gift of an additional $10,000 that I gave to the bride and groom on the night of the wedding, in a white envelope with a handwritten card where I expressed all my love and hope for their future. Everything came from my own resources without asking for anything in return other than seeing my son happy. According to my memories up to that moment, the wedding night had been one of the happiest days of my life. I arrived at the club at 5 in the afternoon to help with final preparations. I saw handsome Daniel in a tuxedo hugging me and thanking me for everything. I saw beautiful Luciana in the white dress that I also helped pay for. I saw the room decorated exactly as we had planned. I greeted all the guests as they arrived, feeling proud and happy for having managed to provide that beautiful party for my only son. I danced, I talked, I ate, I drank champagne in moderation. I cried with tears, emotion during the ceremony and during Daniel's speech, and I returned home that morning exhausted but deeply satisfied, thinking that I had fulfilled my role as a mother in the best way possible. In the months following the wedding, I continued to see Daniel occasionally. Monthly lunches, weekly calls, everything seemed normal on the surface, although I began to subtly notice that he was a little more distant, a little less available, more frequent excuses for not being able to visit me because he was busy with work or projects at his new house. But I didn't pay much attention, thinking it was natural for a newlywed to need time to adjust to married life and establish a routine with his wife. So 3 days ago, on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock, I called Rafael Contreras to ask about the wedding photo album because it had already been 6 months since the event, and he had promised to deliver the complete album within a maximum of 4 months. And when he answered the phone, I immediately knew from the hesitation in his voice that something was wrong. He said that he needed to talk to me personally about the photos before delivering anything, that he had discovered something during the editing process that I needed to see, that was delicate and he preferred to show in person. I made an appointment to Thursday afternoon in his studio, and it took me to that horrible moment in that cramped room looking at my own humiliation, documented in 15 photographs and 3 flash drives. Now, I was lying on that sofa in the dark at 10 o'clock at night from Thursday to Friday, 16 hours after having seen those images and videos, without having eaten anything all day except some dry biscuits and water because I had no stomach for anything else, without having slept at all the night before, body sore from crying, head throbbing with a migraine that took over the entire left side of my skull, making my left eye water involuntarily, throat scratchy and dry from so much sobbing, and thoughts spinning in an increasingly dark downward spiral. I thought about calling Daniel and confronting him, but what exactly would I say? How would I put into words the magnitude of that betrayal? And most importantly, what would be the point of confronting someone who clearly didn't love me and didn't truly care about me? I thought about calling Patricia and yelling at her, swearing at her, demanding an explanation for the unpaid loans and gratuitous cruelty. But again, what would be the point? People who act like that don't have the capacity to feel genuine remorse or shame, so any confrontation would just be more humiliation of me being disqualified and gaslighted. I thought about simply disappearing, taking my documents and the little money left in my account and moving to another city where no one knew me and starting a completely new life. But at 67 years old, with poor health and no support network, this fantasy was completely unrealistic. I thought about even darker, how many lengths of blood pressure and pain medication I would have to take to keep from waking up, how peaceful it would be to simply sleep and not have to deal with that overwhelming pain that seemed to have no end, how Daniel would perhaps even be happy to be free of the weight that I represented in his life. But then the thought of Tomas crossed my mind, and I imagined my husband, who had been dead for so many years, looking at me from that place wherever he was, and feeling disappointment at seeing me giving up. And that mental image of Tomas disappointed in me. It was the first little hook that stopped me from sliding completely into the bottomless abyss I was about to fall into. What would Tomas have done in that situation, I thought? Thomas would have allowed himself to be destroyed by ungrateful people, or he would have fought for his own dignity. Tomas was never one to accept injustice silently. I remembered several situations during our marriage where he had faced people who tried to deceive or exploit him. He had sued his boss once for unpaid wages and won. He had denounced a corrupt auto repair shop that tried to charge for work that had not been performed. He had defended neighbors being unfairly evicted by helping to organize a protest that managed to postpone the eviction. Tomas was not aggressive, but he was not passive either. He had a strong backbone made of an unshakable sense of justice. I sat on the sofa, still in the dark. I turned on a small lamp next to it that cast a circle of weak yellow light, illuminating a small part of the room, leaving the rest in shadows. I took an old notebook and pen from the coffee table, and I started writing. I wrote down everything I remembered from the last few years, situations where I felt strange or uncomfortable, but ignored it at the time. Moments where I noticed subtle changes in Daniel or Patricia's behavior, but rationalized it with excuses. Small incidents that in isolation seemed insignificant, but now connected to form a clear pattern of gradual distancing and increasing disrespect. I wrote about all the loans I made to Patricia with approximate dates and amounts. I added everything up to a total of $53,000 over 20 years. I wrote about all the times I helped Marcos with time, money, energy, love, about the emotional and financial investment of entire decades in these people who now treated me like a disposable joke. I wrote about the $22,000 spent on Daniel's wedding, about the allowance I gave him during 4 years of college, totaling $14,400, about countless other smaller expenses over the 32 years raising him that added up probably amounted to at least another $50,000 or $60,000 in current values. I did approximate mental calculations and came to the devastating conclusion that I had invested in these people throughout my entire adult life somewhere around $140,000 to $150,000 in direct measurable amounts without counting time, emotional energy, sacrifice of my own health and happiness, which were incalculable. And the return I received for all of this was being called a useless old woman, being publicly mocked at my own son's wedding, being systematically excluded, being seen as a burden and unwanted obligation, being planned to be discarded by moving to a distant city without even having the consideration to inform me beforehand. The more I wrote, the more a different emotion began to grow within me. Beneath the layers of pain and devastation, something warmer, more energizing, something that had been stifled during decades of selfless sacrifice, but was now beginning to pulse with a life of its own. It was anger, clean, righteous anger. Not explosive and uncontrolled anger, but cold and focused anger, the kind of anger that doesn't scream but plans, that doesn't break things but builds strategies, that doesn't dissipate quickly but turns into iron determination. I had been used, manipulated, exploited, and discarded, and something deep inside me finally woke up and said, no, it's not going to end like this. They're not going to treat me this way and get away with it. Not after everything I've done. Not after all the sacrifices. They're not going to rewrite my story by turning me into a villain or a burden, when in fact I've always been the one who held everything behind me, the one who gave everything without asking for anything in return, the one who unconditionally loved people who didn't deserve unconditional love. I looked around my simple but clean and organized apartment, an apartment that I bought with the sweat of my brow and that was mine by all rights. I looked at the framed photograph of Tomas on the bookshelf, where he was smiling with the baby Daniel on his lap. I looked at the small mirror on the wall, where I saw a partial reflection of my own face, tired, aged, marked by suffering, but still there, still breathing, still alive, and I made the decision at that moment, at 11:43 in the evening from Thursday to Friday, that I would not go. Simply, I had to accept that I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night for their convenience, that I was going to fight for my dignity, even if it was already too late to recover love or a relationship, because those things clearly never existed in the way I thought they did. But I could at least ensure that there were real consequences for their actions, that they understood that you don't treat a human person like that without a price to pay. On Friday morning, I woke up early at 6 in the morning after sleeping just 2 fragmented hours full of nightmares. I took a long shower, letting hot water relax tense muscles. I dressed in simple but tidy clothes, black fabric pants, white blouse, black closed shoes, tied my hair in a tight bun, put on light makeup to hide as much as possible the dark circles and paleness. And at 8 in the morning, I was already at the door of the law office in the city center, an old 4-story building. Second floor, sign on the door said Mendez y Asociados Advocacia Civil. I rang the doorbell, and a young secretary of about 25 answered the phone, asking if I had an appointment. I said no, but that it was urgent and that I needed to speak to a lawyer as soon as possible about a serious family issue. She hesitated, but something in the expression on my face must have communicated real desperation because she made me sit in the waiting room and went to speak to her boss. 10 minutes later, I was called into a small office lined with shelves full of legal books with the characteristic smell of old paper, and behind a dark wooden table was a man of about 54, well-cut gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, a gray suit with a navy blue tie, a serious but not hostile expression. He introduced himself as Dr. Rodrigo Mendez, founding partner of the firm 26 years ago, specializing in family and civil law. He offered me coffee, which I accepted despite my hands shaking as I held a small porcelain cup, white. I sat down on the brown leather chair in front of his desk and started talking. And once I started, I couldn't stop. Words coming out in a torrent that had been pent up for days and now finally found its way out. I told him everything, absolutely everything. From Tomas's death 43 years ago, to Daniel's wedding 6 months ago, to the devastating discovery of the photos and videos 3 days ago, I showed him the envelope with all the photographs spread out on his desk. I put a black flash drive in his laptop and showed him the video of the cruel conversation in the room. Club? I cried several times during the story, having to stop to compose myself. Dr. Rodrigo watched and listened to everything with absolute attention, making occasional notes on a pad of paper, but mainly just absorbing the story with an expression that gradually changed from neutral professional to genuine indignation. When I finished telling everything, he remained silent for a long minute, looking at photos spread out on the table. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed his tired eyes, put his glasses back on, and said in a firm but gentle voice, "Ms. Carmen, the first thing I need to say is that I'm sorry for what you went through. Very much so. Second thing is that yes, there is a solid legal basis for several actions here. Let's break it down in an organized manner." He picked up a clean pad of paper and began to list. First, the loans to your sister-in-law, Patricia, $53,000 over 20 years, never paid back. Do you have any written proof of these loans? Signed contracts, receipts, wire transfer receipts? I shook my head, feeling the first pang of discouragement because I had never asked for anything in writing. They were loans between families based on trust. But Dr. Rodrigo raised his hand, interrupting my thoughts. Okay, the absence of a written document makes it difficult, but not impossible. If you can gather any indirect evidence, such as bank statements showing transfers to her on specific dates, text or WhatsApp messages where she mentions the loans or thanks you for the financial help, witnesses who knew about the loans, anything like that, we can build a case based on testimonial evidence and circumstantial. It's more difficult, but not impossible. I made a mental note that I would need to check old bank statements that I kept in boxes organized by year in my bedroom closet. He continued, "Second, moral damage. The video you showed me and the photographs constitute clear proof of intentional humiliation, defamation of character, and psychological suffering caused intentionally. We can file a lawsuit for moral damage against your son Daniel, against your daughter-in-law Luciana, against Patricia, against Marcos, and potentially against others who clearly appear in the images actively participating in the humiliation. Moral damage in cases like this is usually assessed between $20,000 and $100,000, depending on the severity that the judge understands. And this case here is particularly serious given that it occurred at a public event, was premeditated as evidenced by the video of the conversation planning the distancing, and involved multiple family members acting in coordination. I felt the first small spark of hope lighting up in my chest when I heard that Dr. Rodrigo continues writing. Third, question of ownership. You mentioned that your current apartment is paid for and is in your name. Great. That means there are protected assets and potential inheritance at stake. We need to check whether you have a will made, and if you do, we need to immediately make a new one, excluding all the people who appear in this story from any future inheritance. We also need to check if there are any other assets in your name, vehicles, bank accounts, investments, anything that constitutes assets that can be protected and directed to wherever you prefer in the future. I nodded, confirming that I had an old model 2012 car worth perhaps $7,000, a savings account with $23,000 saved over the years, and an apartment that was currently worth around $140,000, according to a recent appraisal I had done out of curiosity. Total assets, therefore, approximately $170,000. Dr. Rodrigo wrote everything down and said, "Fourth, we can investigate whether there are grounds for a claim for unjust enrichment relating to the $22,000 spent on the wedding. Did you give that money as a gift or as a loan?" I replied that I had given it as a gift at the time, thinking that it was an act of love from mother to child, but that clearly my contribution was not valued in the slightest, so perhaps there was an argument that it was given under the false pretense that there was a reciprocal loving relationship, when in fact it was being exploited. Dr. Rodrigo smiled slightly and said, "This argument is creative, but legally weak. We would hardly be able to reverse a gift given voluntarily, even with bad faith on the part of the recipient. But we can mention it in the process of damage moral as an aggravating factor, showing that in addition to the humiliation, there was also financial exploitation." He closed his notebook and looked straight into my eyes. "Dona Carmen, I'm going to be brutally honest with you, ma'am. These processes will take time. The Argentine judicial system is slow. We are talking about 2 to 4 years until final sentences. It will cost money too. My fees are 25% of any amount recovered, plus litigation costs that need to be paid in advance. I estimate about $3,000 up front to cover court fees, expert examinations if necessary, bailiffs, etc. And there is no guarantee of winning everything. We can win some cases and lose others, depending on the judge, the evidence we can gather, countless factors. But, he paused dramatically, chances are good, very good. This video alone is worth its weight in gold because it shows premeditation and clear malice. Photos document everything. If we can get more proof of Patricia's loans, we can get at least some of that money back. And moral damages action. I honestly think we have an 80% chance of gaining significant value. So my professional recommendation is, let's go for it. Let's sue them all. Let's make some noise. Let's show that you're not just going to disappear conveniently from their lives. That last sentence resonated inside me like a church bell. I'm not going to disappear conveniently. Not really. And for the first time in days, I felt something like strength returning to my body. I told Dr. Rodrigo that I wanted to move on, that I had the necessary $3,000 in my savings account, and I was willing to invest in it, that I needed to do it not just for the money, but for the sake of principle, for my dignity, for the message that you don't treat human people like that without consequences. He reached out to shake my hand, sealing a verbal agreement, said he would prepare formal representation contracts for me to sign the following week, and that in the meantime I should start gathering all possible evidence, old bank statements, text or WhatsApp messages with any mention of loans or family relationships, a list of names and contact details of witnesses who could testify about my sacrifices for the family and the behavior of the defendants, any relevant documents. I left that office at 10:45 in the morning, feeling drained but also strangely energized, as if had just received a new blood transfusion. I spent the whole Friday and the whole weekend organizing documents, going through old boxes of paper stored in the bedroom closet, finding bank statements dating back to 15 years ago, where clear transfers appeared to Patricia's account, adding up over the years to significant amounts. Not the full $53,000 because some loans were in unrecorded cash, but at least $38,000 documented in wire transfers, which was better than nothing. I reviewed old WhatsApp conversations with Patricia, discovering several where she effusively thanked her for financial help, mentioning specific amounts. Thank you, sister-in-law, for the transfer of $2,500 that saved me this month. I love you. You are an angel. I don't know how to repay what you do for me. Messages like that would now serve as written proof of debt acknowledgement. I made a list of possible witnesses, including Donna Conceição, a 76-year-old neighbor who had lived in the apartment next to mine for 12 years and had witnessed countless situations where I helped my family, where I cried to her about feeling alone despite having a family, where I showed her photos and videos of Daniel and Patricia, always talking about them with pride, even when they started to treat me badly. Donna Conceição had a sharp mind and an excellent memory and could certainly testify about everything she witnessed. I also included in the list distant cousin Felipe, 50 years old, son of my father's deceased cousin, who had appeared at Daniel's wedding and had mentioned at the time that he thought it was strange that I was so isolated at the party. He could testify about what he observed. I included Marta, a former colleague from the sewing workshop who had been my friend for 30 years and knew my entire history with Daniel and Patricia. She could testify about my sacrifices and how much I always spoke about my family with love. On Monday at 9 in the morning, I returned to Dr. Rodrigo's office with 3 thick folders organized, one with bank statements and receipts, one with prints of WhatsApp conversations and old text messages that had been screenshotted and printed, and one with a typed list of 7 potential witnesses with addresses and telephone numbers for each one. Dr. Rodrigo was visibly impressed with the level of organization. He reviewed everything for 2 hours while I waited, drinking coffee after coffee, becoming increasingly nervous. And finally he looked up from the documents and said with a small smile, "Ms. Carmen, this is excellent. With this evidence, we can prove at least $38,000 of loans plus monetary correction and interest, which brings the value to approximately $51,000 current dollars. The witnesses strengthen the case of moral damage exponentially because they show a pattern of behavior over time. I will start preparing initial petitions today. In 2 weeks, we can file everything." He then explained the strategy. Sue Patricia first for debt collection of $51,000. Simultaneously file a moral damage action against Daniel, Luciana, Patricia, and Marcos, asking for compensation of $80,000 for the suffering caused, documented in photos and videos, and investigate the possibility of adding other defendants as the process progresses and more information emerges. The biggest impact will be emotional and social, Dr. Rodrigo explained. When these actions are filed and they receive summonses from the bailiff, it will be a brutal shock because they are not expecting it. They will try to contact the lady, they will try to negotiate, they will be desperate. And when trials eventually happen, everything will be public. It will appear in court records. Other people in the community will know. Their reputation will be affected. That is the price of cruelty. In the following weeks, while Dr. Rodrigo prepared processes, I took other practical steps. I opened a completely new bank account at a different bank where my old account was, transferred the $23,000 from savings to this new account, leaving only $1,000 in the old account for basic transactions, in case Daniel or Patricia somehow had access or knowledge about the old account and tried something. I changed passwords for all my online accesses, email, social networks, banking, apps, everything, using complex combinations that I wrote down in a physical notebook hidden at the bottom of the wardrobe. I digitized all important documents, including the apartment deed, personal documents, certificates, and saved everything on a USB stick that I kept in a small safe that I bought especially for this. I went to the registry office and made a new will, revoking any previous will that may have existed, leaving the apartment and all assets to Dona Concheição, my neighbor, since I had no one else to trust. At least she was always kind to me and deserved to receive something of value, and leaving only a symbolic amount of $1,000 to Daniel, with a specific clause saying, I leave only symbolic value to my son Daniel, because during his life, I made it clear that a mother's love and support were unconditional, but dignity has a price, and he chose not to. I went to see a psychologist for the first time in my life, a 58-year-old professional called Dr. Sofia Ramos, who had an office 10 blocks from my house. I told her everything that happened, including photos and videos. She was horrified and immediately started seeing me in weekly sessions to treat trauma and depression that I was obviously developing. She prescribed a mild antidepressant that I started taking. She also connected me with a support group for elderly women who had suffered family abuse, a small group of 6 women that met every 2 weeks, in a room at the local parish. 3 weeks after my first consultation with Dr. Rodrigo, on a Tuesday at 2 p.m, bailiffs went simultaneously to the homes of Daniel, Luciana, Patricia, and Marcos to deliver court summons, notifying them that they were being sued by me. Dr. Rodrigo had planned it strategically so that everyone would receive it on the same day, creating maximum emotional impact. My cell phone started ringing at 2:23 p.m, Daniel's number appearing on the display. I didn't answer. He called 8 times in a row in the next 2 hours. I didn't answer any. Patricia called 12 times. I didn't answer. Marcos called 4 times. I didn't answer. Luciana called once. I didn't answer. WhatsApp messages started arriving in an avalanche. Mom, what's this crazy? Call me urgently. Tia Carmen, for the love of God. Answer the phone, we need to talk. Ma'am, you're going crazy. This is absurd. Let's sort this out. Messages like this alternating between shock, anger, trying to blame my mental health, trying to minimize, but none accepting real responsibility or showing genuine regret for what they did. I followed Dr. Rodrigo's instructions and didn't respond at all. Complete silence was the most powerful strategy at that moment, because it left them in complete uncertainty about my intentions and mental state. 2 days later, Thursday at 11 a.m, Daniel showed up at my apartment, rang the doorbell insistently for 5 minutes. I looked through the peephole of the door and saw him standing there in the hallway with an expression of anger and frustration on his face. I knocked on the door shouting, Mom, open this door. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. But I didn't open it. I stayed on the other side in silence until he eventually gave up and left, slamming the hallway door so hard that the pictures in my living room rattled on the walls. Dona Concheição, who had heard the commotion, came knocking on my door a few minutes later, worried. I let her in. I explained everything that was happening. She hugged me tightly and said that she was doing it absolutely right and that she shouldn't give in under any circumstances. That same night, Patricia also showed up. She rang the doorbell at 8:30 at night, this time with Marcos. They stood there shouting in the hallway, threatening, "Carmen, open this door now. You've gone crazy. You're going to pay dearly for this. We're going to destroy you." Violent language that scared other neighbors who came out of their apartments to see what was happening. The situation got so serious that the neighbor on the 4th floor threatened to call the police if they didn't calm down. They eventually left, but left a note tucked under my door, handwritten by Patricia. "You've always been Snake. Now you've shown your true colors. You'll regret it. No one in your family will ever talk to you again. You'll die alone and bitter as you deserve. I hope you'll be happy." I took that note with my hands wearing oven mitts so as not to leave my fingerprints. I put it in a transparent plastic bag. I took a photo with my cell phone, and I took it to Dr. Rodrigo the next day. He loved it because it constituted additional proof of harassment and threat that we could add to the moral damage process by increasing the amount requested. In the following weeks, attempts to contact continued intermittently, but less and less frequently, as they realized that I was not going to respond. WhatsApp messages gradually changed from anger to attempts at emotional manipulation. "Mom, you are going to destroy our family because of a misunderstanding. Think carefully about what you are doing. Auntie, we have always been family because you are doing this. We can talk civilly and resolve everything." But none of the messages acknowledged what they had done. None genuinely apologized. All tried to minimize or reverse it as if the problem was my overreaction and not the action. Their original. I eventually blocked all numbers following the advice of Dr. Rodrigo and Dr. Sofia, who agreed that contact with them was only hurting me and had no productive purpose. 3 months passed like this, me living in a kind of self-imposed isolation, but paradoxically feeling less and less alone as I connected more with Dona Concepcion, who became a true friend, as I participated in the support group and heard stories from other people. There were women who went through similar situations and managed to survive and rebuild, as I continued weekly therapy with Dr. Sofia, who helped me process trauma and rebuild a sense of self-worth that had been systematically destroyed by my family. 4 months after the filing of the cases, there was the first court hearing. I attended accompanied by Dr. Rodrigo. Daniel and Luciana were there with their lawyer, a man in his 40s in a gray suit who seemed very confident. Patricia and Marcos were there with their lawyer, a woman in her early 30s with an aggressive posture. It was the first time I had seen them all since discovering the photos. Daniel avoided my gaze completely. Luciana glared at me with eyes full of hatred. Patricia tried to approach me in the forum hallway, but Dr. Rodrigo blocked her, saying that any communication had to be through lawyers. Marcos stood in the back with his arms crossed with an expression of contempt. The hearing itself was procedural. A judge in her 50s with gray hair tied in a severe bun read, "Proceedings," established future dates for the presentation of evidence and witnesses, denied Daniel's lawyer's request for summary rejection of the case, saying that there was enough merit for a full trial. This was a small victory that Dr. Rodrigo celebrated discreetly. I left the forum feeling a strange mix of sadness at seeing my son turned into a hostile stranger, and satisfaction that I was finally doing something to defend my dignity instead of just passively accepting abuse. In the following months, processes progressed slowly, as Dr. Rodrigo had predicted. There were multiple hearings where witnesses were heard. Mrs. Concepcion testified brilliantly, describing everything she had witnessed over the years. Cousin Felipe testified about their behavior at the wedding. Marta testified about my sacrifices. Psychologist Dr. Sofia testified as an expert witness about the psychological impact of family abuse documented in the photos and videos. Technical expertise confirmed the authenticity of the photos and videos, proving that they were not manipulated. Lawyers for Daniel and Patricia tried several defense strategies. They argued that photos were taken out of context, that video of the conversation was recorded illegally, that I was fabricating the story out of revenge or jealousy, that loans never happened or were gifts rather than loans, that moral damage was not that serious and I was exaggerating. But the evidence was too solid and the witnesses were very credible. The judge was clearly not buying their arguments. In one of the hearings, Daniel's lawyer made a huge tactical error of suggesting that I was always an inadequate mother and that Daniel was right to distance himself. Dr. Rodrigo immediately counterattacked by presenting old photos of me and Daniel as a baby, child, teenager, school payment documents, letters that Daniel had written to me when he was a child, saying how much he loved me, material that completely destroyed the narrative of an inadequate mother, and made even the judge frown in disapproval at Daniel's lawyer. 7 months after the start of the proceedings, Patricia's lawyer approached Dr. Rodrigo offering an agreement. She would pay $15,000 immediately and the rest of the debt in installments over 5 years if I withdrew the moral damage action against her. Dr. Rodrigo called me immediately to discuss the offer. I thought for a few minutes and said, no, I wouldn't accept a partial settlement. I wanted a full trial and judicial sentence that formally established that she was wrong and I was right. It wasn't just about money. 2 weeks later, Daniel's lawyer offered $30,000 to close the entire case, including withdrawing lawsuits against all defendants. Again, I refused. Dr. Rodrigo was surprised by my firmness, but respected my decision. He said that few of his clients had the courage to go all the way even when reasonable financial offers appeared. That says a lot about your character, Ms. Carmen, he said. Ma'am, you want real justice, not just financial compensation. It's rare and admirable. 10 months after the start of the proceedings, there was a final hearing with conclusive arguments on both sides. A small and stuffy courtroom was partially filled with some distant family members on both sides. Daniel and Luciana sitting rigidly staring straight ahead, Patricia crying in a way that seemed theatrical. Marcos, Rab Continuar 17, 12 ugly and aggressive. Lawyers presented final arguments. Dr. Rodrigo gave an emotional and brilliant 20-minute speech, describing my life of sacrifice and incomprehensible cruelty that I received in return. He showed again a video of the cruel conversation that was still shocking, even though it had been seen multiple times. He ended by saying, Your Honor, this woman gave everything she had to these people and was discarded like trash. This cannot be done left without a response from justice, not just for her own sake, but for the principle that family is not a license for abuse. Defense lawyers made weak arguments focusing on procedural technicalities because they had no real substantial defense. It was obvious to everyone in the room that the case was lost to them. The judge said she would give sentence in 30 days, and those were the longest 30 days of my life up to that point. Anxiety eating me alive, thinking about all the possibilities. What if the judge decided against me, even with all the evidence? What if the judicial system failed? What if I had spent my money and time and emotional energy on a losing fight? But finally, on the appointed day, Thursday afternoon, 3:45 in the afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Rodrigo in a euphoric voice saying, We won, Dona Carmen. We won everything. The sentence was favorable on all points. I sat on the kitchen chair with wobbly legs, listening to him read the summary of the sentence. Judge determined that Patricia must pay $51,000 of unpaid loans plus interest and correction, totaling $63,700. Determined that the 4 defendants, Daniel, Luciana, Patricia, and Marcos, must jointly pay $80,000 in moral damages to me, totaling $143,700 to be paid. The judge also wrote harsh sections in the sentence criticizing the defendant's behavior, specifically citing unjustifiable cruelty and serious violation of the basic duties of family respect. I cried on the phone. I don't know if they were tears of relief or sadness or some complex mixture of both, because I had won legally, but I had permanently lost the relationship with my son and family that I thought I had. In the following months, the process of executing the sentence began. Patricia did not have the money to pay her share, so lawyers began the process of seizing her assets. We discovered that she had a small apartment in her name that she had bought years ago, with money that probably included my loans that were never returned. The apartment was valued at $56,000 and put up for judicial auction to pay off the debt. Daniel and Luciana also did not have the liquidity to pay $80,000 divided by the 4 defendants. So $20,000 each. Daniel's bank account was partially blocked with a percentage of his monthly salary being automatically withheld until payment was completed. A process that would take years, but at least it was happening. Marcos lost a motorcycle he had recently purchased. The vehicle was pawned and auctioned, generating $7,000 that were credited to my account. Through a community gossip network, I learned that their financial situation had seriously deteriorated. Daniel and Luciana had given up plans to move to Mendoza because they spent all their savings on lawyers and were now stuck with his salary being partially withheld. They were living in a smaller and cheaper rented apartment in a distant neighborhood. Their marriage was under enormous pressure with rumors of frequent arguments and possible separation. Patricia had to move to a boarding house after losing her apartment. She worked 2 jobs as a cleaning assistant to survive the age of 70 when she should have been retired and resting. Marcos was living with a friend because he couldn't pay his own rent, working as a delivery boy on an app, driving a borrowed old motorcycle. Part of me that still had the capacity to feel empathy was sad to see their destruction, but a larger part of me, that had been destroyed by them first, felt that justice was being done. It was not pleasure in other people's suffering, but rather satisfaction in seeing consequences proportional to actions. During this period of a year and a half, between the beginning of the proceedings and the execution of the sentences, my personal life was transformed in surprising ways. Dr. Sophia continued to see me weekly, and I gradually processed the trauma, understanding that it was not me who failed as a mother, but that Daniel had his own issues and insecurities that he projected onto me, learning that I could not control or change what others felt about me, but I could control how I saw and treated myself. A support group became an essential support network. I met Beatriz, aged 63, who had a similar story of being discarded by her children after years of sacrifice. I met Rosa, aged 70, who had been forcibly admitted to an asylum by her nephews, who wanted to keep her apartment until she managed to get it back through a lawyer. I met Inez, aged 69, who had been robbed by her own daughter, who forged a power of attorney and sold her house. Hearing these stories made me realize that I was not alone, that this was not my personal failure, but a terrible pattern that happened to many elderly women, and that surviving and fighting back, coming back like we were all doing, was an act of courage and resistance. I started participating in other activities. I joined a seniors group at the local church that organized monthly trips. I went to Minas de Wanda in the province of Misiones for the first time, a 12-hour bus ride with a group of 30 elderly people singing old songs and laughing along the way. I got to know places I had never visited, despite living in Argentina all my life, because I had never had the time or money or mental permission to do something just for my own pleasure. I bought new clothes for the first time in years, not expensive clothes, but pretty, colorful pieces that made me feel good. I threw away old, worn-out clothes that I used for pure savings, but that made me look older and more defeated than I was. I started dance classes for seniors, foro and tango, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. A hall of mirrors where a group of 20 women and 5 men, all over the age of 60, met to dance and socialize. I resumed crocheting that I had abandoned years ago due to lack of time. I started making decorative pieces and baby clothes. I posted photos on Facebook and WhatsApp, and to my surprise, orders started to appear. Neighbors, acquaintances of acquaintances, people wanting to buy pieces that I made. I established fair prices and started generating extra income of $1,000 to $1,500 a month with work I did in the comfort of my home at whatever time I wanted. Work. That gave me pleasure, not just suffering as working in the workshop used to do. Money that I began to receive from court sentences. First, the $7,000 from Marcos's motorcycle. Then monthly installments withheld from Daniel's salary. Then part of the auction value of Patricia's apartment. Everything was being deposited into my new account, and I carefully invested half in a conservative investment fund that yielded 6% per year, managing to increase my assets, which now included an apartment worth $140,000. A car worth $7,000. Investments that reached $120,000, a total of $267,000 at 60 and 8 years old, more money than I ever dreamed of having. Financial security that guaranteed a peaceful old age. I used part of the money, $20,000, to fulfill an old dream of traveling to Italy, where my mother's family had its origins. I went with a tour group for 2 weeks, visiting Rome, Florence, Venice, Naples, walking through ancient stone streets, imagining my mother Rosa as a young girl walking along the same streets before emigrating, crying at the tomb of grandparents I never met in the cemetery of a small town in Calabria, feeling a deep connection with roots that I had neglected. Throughout my life, focused only on surviving and serving others. 1 year and 9 months after discovering the photos, I received an unexpected message from an unknown number on WhatsApp. It was Marcos, my nephew, asking to talk in person. I initially ignored him, but he politely insisted for several days until I finally agreed to meet him in a public cafe in the city center, Café Sorocabana, on Avenida Vélez Sarsfield, a busy place where I felt safe. He arrived at the scheduled time, 3 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. He was visibly different from the last time I had seen him at the court hearing, much thinner. Perhaps he had lost 10 or 12 kilos, simple and worn clothes, a hunched posture of defeat, deep circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly when he picked up the cup of coffee he ordered. We sat at a small table near the window, natural light illuminating his prematurely aged face, and for a long minute we sat in awkward silence until he finally began to speak in a hoarse, low voice. "Aunt Carmen, I know I have no right to ask for anything, and I'm not going to ask for anything. I didn't come here to ask you to withdraw the lawsuits or to forgive us or anything like that. I just came to say that you were right and we were wrong, completely wrong, cruelly wrong." He paused, eyes filling with tears that began to run down his face without trying to hide or wipe them away. "I was terrible to you. I was cruel, ungrateful. I took part in horrible things, and I have no excuse. You raised me, you helped me in everything. You were always good to me, and I reciprocated by being part of that idiotic group mocking you, laughing at your pain. I deserve everything that happened to me afterwards." "I lost everything. My mother lost everything. Daniel and Luciana are in bad shape. But you know what's worse? It's not losing money or an apartment or a motorcycle. It's realizing the kind of person I've become. I look in the mirror, and I don't recognize anyone who looks back. Do you know what it's like to wake up every day remembering terrible things you did to someone who only treated you well? It's hell, Auntie." He was crying openly now, shoulders shaking with sobs, others clenching. Cafe customers looking discreetly. "My mother won't admit it. She's still mad at you and refuses to accept that we caused everything. Daniel won't admit it either. He's in total denial, blaming you for everything like he always does. But I can't pretend anymore. I need you to know that I'm deeply sorry. I don't expect forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that at least one of us, me, understands what we did and carries it every day." I heard all of this feeling a complex mix of sadness at the definitive death of the relationship that existed and satisfaction at finally hearing real recognition of the error. He continued, "I'm in therapy now, twice a week, trying to understand why I was able to do that, why it was so easy for me to discard you. Therapist says it has to do with how my mother always talked bad about you behind your back, even when she took your money. How she planted resentment in me since I was a child, saying that you were controlling and manipulative when in fact you were just trying to help. How Daniel also influenced his attitude towards you. How we formed a kind of family cult where it was normal to belittle you. But understanding is not an excuse. I was an adult. I had responsibility for my actions. He finally wiped his face with a paper napkin, took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Daniel and Luciana are going to separate. You haven't heard yet, but it's happening. The marriage completely imploded under financial pressure, and because they discovered they got married for the wrong reasons. She wanted financial stability, and he wanted to get out of her shadow. Neither of them really loved each other. They're going to announce their separation next month. My mother is living in a $300 a month pension, tiny room sharing a bathroom with 6 other people, working to the bone at 71. I'm surviving, but not living. And you know what else does it hurt? Knowing you're okay. I hear through the gossip mill that you're traveling, making friends, have an active life, and I'm genuinely happy for you, but also devastated that we destroyed the chance to be part of that good life you built after everything. He looked directly into my eyes for the first time since the conversation began. Can I make a request? Not a request for me, but for you. Please don't let what we did stop you from being happy. Please continue living well, traveling, enjoying the money you honestly earned working your whole life. Please don't be bitter like my mother was. You deserve everything good that comes into your life. When he finished speaking, I remained silent for a long time, organizing thoughts and feelings. Finally, I replied in a calm and firm voice, Marcos, I accept your apology, and I believe you are being sincere at this moment. But you need to understand that accepting an apology is not the same thing as reconciliation. What happened permanently killed the relationship that existed. There is no going back. I will not withdraw the lawsuits because you need to pay for what you did, not just for me, but for yourselves to learn that actions have consequences. You are suffering now, and part of me feels sorry, but another bigger part knows that this suffering is necessary for your growth as a person. When I die, and it is not far away because I am 68 years old and in poor health, you will not be notified. There will be no funeral for you to attend. There will be no inheritance for you or Daniel or Patricia. He nodded, showing that he understood and accepted that. But, I continued, I hope you can recover and build a decent life from now on. I don't harbor hatred for you, Marcos. Holding hatred would poison my life, not yours. I feel more sadness than anger at this point. Sadness for what could have been and wasn't. You can go on with your life, knowing that you at least had the courage to acknowledge a mistake and apologize, which is more than your mother or Daniel will ever do. We stayed for a few more minutes talking superficially about nothing important. Then we said goodbye with a formal handshake. He got up, looked at me one last time with an expression of deep melancholy, and left. I sat there for another half hour, drinking a second cup of coffee, looking out the window at the traffic on the street. people rushing by with their lives and problems, and I felt strangely at peace. That conversation had been some kind of closure, not complete, but partial, enough. Two full years after discovering the photos, on a Saturday morning in October, 10:15 in the morning, temperature of 25 degrees, bright blue sky without clouds. I was sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, comfortable plastic chair with a flowery cushion that I bought. Small table next to it, with a cup of coffee with milk still steaming, and a plate with 3 invoices of dulce de leche that I bought from a bakery on the corner. Newspaper open in the culture section reading, a review of a play that I wanted to watch next week with Dona Conceição. I stopped reading for a moment and looked around. Potted plants that I had purchased and were growing successfully. Large green fern hanging, red geraniums on the windowsill, assorted succulents in small pots, all growing well with regular care. Apartment behind me, clean and organized, decorated with new things I bought in the last few months. Colorful curtains, soft carpet in the living room, happy pictures on the walls, everything reflecting personal taste of mine that I had never had the opportunity or mental permission to express before. I thought about the woman I was 2 years ago, broken on that couch in the dark, wanting to die, thinking that life was over because my family rejected me. And I looked at the woman I was now, sitting on the porch in the sun, reading the newspaper, planning my next social activity, financially secure with $267,000 in assets, socially connected with Dona Conceição and the support group and dance group and several new friends I made, emotionally healthier than I ever was, even with permanent scars, physically better too, because I had gained healthy weight back to 60 kilos, blood pressure controlled at 100. And 20 by 80, recent exams all normal. The transformation was so complete that it sometimes seemed unreal, as if 2 different people had lived through these experiences. It wasn't a magical cure. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. I still had bad days where I woke up sad, remembering Daniel as a baby in my lap, Daniel as a child hugging me before going to sleep, Daniel as a teenager telling me he loved me. And it physically hurt that loss of the relationship I thought I had, but discovered that it never existed in the way I imagined. I still occasionally dreamed of Patricia and Tomas and their family together happily. I woke up from these dreams with a feeling of heavy loss in my chest that took hours to dissipate. I still felt pangs of loneliness when I saw other women my age, with children and grandchildren visiting, participating in active, loving family lives that I would never have. But a crucial difference was that now that pain no longer defined me, it no longer consumed me. It was just part of my story, not the whole story. I had built a new life based not on sacrifice for others, but on self-care, not on external validation, but on intrinsic worth, not on blood relationships that proved toxic, but on chosen connections that proved to be genuine. I learned that family is not just those who share DNA, but those who share respect and reciprocity. That true love is not suffering and unilateral sacrifice, but a healthy and balanced exchange. That dignity is non-negotiable and is worth more than maintaining false peace. 3 months ago, I met Mr. Hector Romero, 73 years old, a widower for 4 years, retired from an accountant career, a kind man with a dry sense of humor and sharp intelligence, through the dance group. We started talking after tango class and discovered that we lived relatively close by. He in the Güemes neighborhood, I in Alberti, just 20 minutes by bus away. We started having coffee after classes, conversations that lasted for 2-3 hours, covering everything from politics to literature to life experiences. I discovered that he also had a complicated family history, a son who emigrated to Spain and cut off contact, a daughter who only called when she needed money, so he understood my situation perfectly without judgment. We also started meeting outside of dance classes, having lunch once a week at a simple but cozy restaurant in the center, Café de la Plaza, where we always ordered milanesas with mashed potatoes and salad and stayed talking until coffee in the afternoon. A month ago, he invited me to go to the cinema, an afternoon screening of an Argentine film that we both wanted to see. Then we went for a walk in Sarmiento Park, talking about films and life. And when he accompanied me back to my building, as I said goodbye at the door, he gently held my hand and asked if I would accept dating him officially. I was surprised and moved. I didn't expect that at 68 years old, I thought the romantic part of life had ended when Tomas died 43 years ago. But looking at Hector and seeing genuine sincerity in his light brown eyes, feeling warmth and respect in the way he treated me, I thought, why not? Why not give myself this chance to experience companionship and maybe love again? I said yes. He smiled a huge smile that lit up his entire face, gave me a soft kiss on the cheek, and since then we have been dating in a calm and age-appropriate way. Dating regular, nightly phone calls at 9 when we talked for half an hour about each other's day, planning a trip together to Bariloche next January. Yesterday, Friday afternoon, I received final notification from the court informing that all amounts of the court sentences had been completely paid through a combination of the auction of Patricia's apartment, monthly salary withholdings, and seizures of assets. A total of $143,700 had already been deposited in my account. After deducting legal fees from Dr. Rodrigo, who was left with 25% plus costs, I received a net of $101,800. The processes were officially closed. Chapter closed. There was something deeply symbolic and satisfying about it, not because money replaced lost love or family, but because it represented official and public recognition through the judicial system that I had been unfairly harmed and deserved redress. It was validation that I never received from Daniel or Patricia or Marcos, but that the justice system gave me. It was a clear message to myself and to them, and to anyone paying attention, that dignity has value, that mistreatment has a price, that elderly women are not disposable without consequences. I kept a copy of the final sentence in a special folder along with all the photos and videos and documents from the process, not to dwell on it, but as a historical record of my fight and victory, something to look at in future moments of doubt, and remember that I was strong when I needed to be, that I defended myself when no one else would do it for me. This Saturday morning, after finishing coffee and bills on the balcony, I dressed for going out. Blue jeans that I bought last month, a floral printed blouse, comfortable sandals, picked up my bag and went to visit the municipal cemetery where Tomas is buried, a 30-minute bus ride to the main gate, a 10-minute walk between rows of tombs until I reached the mass grave, identified only by a small metal plaque with his name and dates of birth and death. Tomas Eduardo Castro, 1009. $133 to $1,978. I stood there in front of that piece of land that held the bones of the man I genuinely loved and who genuinely loved me back, and I talked to him as if he were alive. I told him everything that had happened in the last 2 years, everything I discovered, everything I did, everything I achieved. "You would be proud of me, my love," she said in a low voice so as not to sound crazy to other visitors to the nearby cemetery. I defended myself. I didn't let them destroy me. I fought back, and I won. I didn't win Daniel back because he was never really mine in the way I thought, but I gained my dignity. I gained my peace. I gained my life. I'm okay now, Tomas. Finally, after so long suffering and sacrificing and serving others without taking care of myself, I'm okay. I'm living, not just surviving. And I met someone, you know, a good man named Hector. It's not you and never will be, but it's keeping up with the kind person who treats me with respect that I always deserve to receive. I hope you don't get jealous from where you are." I smiled slightly, imagining Tomas laughing at that. "Thank you for being a good husband to me in the 15 years we had together." Thank you for Daniel, even though he didn't turn out as we had hoped. At least we had those first beautiful years with him when he was a child and he genuinely loved us. Rest in peace, my love. I'll be fine from now on. I promise. I placed a small bouquet of white daisies that I had brought there on earth on his tomb. I remained a few more minutes in silence, breathing the fresh morning air, feeling a spiritual connection with a man who shared a significant part of my life. And then I said goodbye and left feeling a strange feeling of closure and liberation. In the afternoon, I have lunch scheduled with Hector at his favorite restaurant. Then we go together to watch an art exhibition at the Museo Carafa, then maybe walk a little in Parque Sarmiento if time permits and our legs can handle it. Tomorrow Sunday, I will participate in a support group meeting where I will share an update on the closure of the processes, and other women will celebrate this victory with me as we celebrate each other's victories whenever they happen. Next Tuesday and Thursday, I have dance classes. Next Friday, Mrs. Conceição and I are going to the theater to see a play that I read a review of today in the newspaper. Next month, a trip to Bariloche with Hector, the first romantic trip in 43 years. January later, I have a trip already scheduled with a senior group to Colonia del Sacramento in Uruguay. 3 days crossing Rio de la Plata by boat and exploring the historic city. My schedule is full, my life is full, not with blood family that discarded me, but with people I chose and who chose me back, with activities that give me pleasure, from experiences that I accumulate, creating new and positive memories that gradually replace or at least balance old and painful memories. If this story touched you, if you are going through or have been through family betrayal or any situation where you were discarded or belittled by people who should love you, leave your comment saying where you are watching it from and share it with someone who needs to know that it is possible to start over even when it seems like everything is over. Like if you believe that no woman deserves to be treated as disposable, that dignity is priceless, that as long as we breathe, we have the power to change our history. I changed mine. I was 67 years old when I discovered that my entire family hated me and made fun of me. I could have given up and died of sadness. But I chose to fight, I chose to defend myself, I chose to rebuild, and now at 68, I am living the best life I have ever lived, surrounded by genuine people, financially secure, emotionally healthier, with a future ahead full of possibilities. You can too. No matter your age, no matter how much time you wasted on people who didn't deserve it, no matter how broken you feel right now, there is always a way forward if you choose to fight for your dignity. If you choose to value yourself even when no one else does. If you choose to believe that you deserve respect and true love, not crumbs of conditioned affection. And always remember, family is not those who share blood. Family is those who share respect. As long as you breathe, you have power. Use this power wisely. Use it to defend yourself. Use it to rebuild yourself. Use it to live fully the time that remains. I did it. You can do it too.